Good afternoon, morning, wherever you are. Welcome to our webinar today. It's very exciting. I'm very thrilled that we got David to speak for us. So glad you could all make it. As Toastmasters, David says we learn skills that make us better speakers. We learn how to make eye contact. I'm still working on that. And how to use our body language, to employ vocal variety, and to incorporate feedback. As Toastmaster audiences, we notice things. But David Otey raises an interesting question. Outside of Toastmasters, what do audiences notice? David is a professional speaker and trainer who has spent thousands of hours in front of thousands of audience members, both in person and virtually. Not only is he an accomplished Toastmaster, having been to the international semifinals twice, but he is also a member of the Colorado chapter of National Speakers Association. David contends that no matter what our delivery skills may be, we only serve our audiences well when we meet their needs. And some of these needs may surprise you. Please welcome David with his speech, Audiences Do Not Need Speakers. David.
Well, you just heard the bad news, my friends. Audiences don't need speakers. But here's the good news. They might need someone just like you. You're thinking, wait a minute, did David just say I'm not a speaker? No, not at all. You're here in this Toastmasters audience, so I'm sure you're a capable speaker. My question is, what's your plan for becoming a better one? And what does that mean anyway? I have a very simple definition of a good speaker. A good speaker is one who makes a lasting difference to their audience. And a better speaker makes more of a difference more often to more people. Is that the kind of speaker you'd like to be? Well, my premise is that everyone here can learn to be and even start to be a better speaker the minute you start thinking differently about what your audience needs from you. Because they don't need speakers, but they might need you. So to find out what audiences truly need and how you can meet that need, we're going to go on a little journey in my magic time machine. And our first stop, you'll encounter some people who needed something quite different from what I had assumed they needed. On our second stop, you'll learn something that all audiences always need. And on our third stop, you'll hear how I learned my superpower by getting naked at a wedding. And then you're going to want to jump right back in that time machine, I'm sure. No, don't worry. This is the G-rated version. The first stop on our journey takes us back to 2006. That was when I found myself in charge of a training project. But this was not just any training project. This was a project on a scale that had never before been seen in the TV news industry. If our training was successful, a new digital technology would be adopted across the entire industry. If not, some of those broadcasters were going to cling tenaciously to their old analog way of doing things. And what was at stake was investments totaling $1 billion. But what was at stake for me was my reputation as an engineer. And not just any engineer. The company that had hired me for this training had said when they brought me on board, we want you to be here as part of this team because we've seen how you can take a challenging concept and make it understandable. See, that was my stock in trade. That was what I was known for. And that's why I was watching very closely at a hotel meeting room in Yuma, Arizona, as the trainers I had trained went through our program with our very first group of trainees. Now, we had been working for months to develop this program. We had compiled all the best information on how the technology worked and on how it's going to help these people do their jobs. We had demo equipment. We had animated PowerPoints. If a kitchen sink would have helped comprehension, we'd have had that too. We were prepared. I had even told my team, we're going to be prepared not only for those good people in Yuma, but also for the big city observers that may be coming in from Phoenix and Los Angeles. We were prepared for any reaction we could have gotten. Well, except the one we got. The looks on their faces said it all. They said, is this it? This is what you spent months developing? This doesn't meet our needs. Have you ever had that happen to you? You prepare something, a speech for Toastmasters or a training or presentation, and at the end, you just don't get the response you were hoping for? I looked across the room at Bill, one of my teammates, as if to say, are you hearing what I'm hearing? Have you ever had one of those moments that just seems to divide your life into before and after? See, before, I was the sought-after expert on this technology. A senior vice president of engineering from one of the major TV networks once called up my boss and said, how do we know this training you're developing is going to be any good? And the answer came back, we put David Otey in charge of it. Oh, well, in that case, let us know when it's ready. You don't believe me, but that conversation actually took place. After Yuma, I thought, there goes my reputation, down in flames. So I went home to Denver to lick my wounds and consider my next steps. For solace, I called up my friend Ken, who is not an engineer, by the way. I told him what happened, and Ken said something interesting. He said, well, David, it sounds like maybe you designed this program for the engineers and not for the people who will actually be using the new technology. Did you ask them what they wanted to know about it? How could we have not asked that? Never underestimate the value of having friends who are not engineers. So I decided, you know what, we can salvage this. So my next call went out to my friend Eric at Channel 4 News. I said, Eric, I want to do a ride along with one of your news photographers. You see, I knew that that station was about to be an early adopter of the new technology. So while we were out in the field together, I asked this photographer about the technology. And do you know what he said? He didn't say, I want to know how it works. He didn't say, I want to know how it'll help me do my job. Here's what he said. I'm afraid I'll get yelled at or fired when my news shot freezes up, my live shot freezes up in the middle of the news. I'm afraid. Did you hear that? I want you to try something sometime. Walk into a room full of people and say, I'm here to take away your fear. And see what kind of reaction you get. Yeah, we didn't think that was going to work so well either. So we knew when we went back to redesign the program, as we did, that we had to be more subtle about it. So we redesigned the program so that we would show people not how the new technology worked, but how it would make their job easier. We would show them how to use their new instruments instead of their eyeballs. We would show them exactly what to do to keep their live shots from freezing up. And at the end, we would replace that fear with a newfound confidence in their ability to do their job well. Well, that was the plan anyway. When we rolled out this second version of the training in Pittsburgh, I almost couldn't watch. I thought, this is it. This is our second chance. We can't blow it. You know what happened? the people came away from that training saying, that was the best training I've ever had. I can't wait to get my hands on our new equipment. Whew. It was a complete success. The procedures we taught were adopted across an entire industry. And by the time that program ended, we had changed the lives and the outlooks of more than 10,000 people. And I learned something. Oh, and incidentally, salvaged my reputation along the way. Those people learned something, and I learned something. When you speak, you're not there to show off what you know. You are there to plant seeds in your audience's minds. Seeds of ideas and feelings that can take root and grow. And here's what Ken helped me see when he asked me about what they needed. You can't plant the seed if you don't meet the need. See, your audience, your information goes nowhere if you don't meet the needs of your audience. You can't plant the seed if you don't meet the need. Has this ever happened to you? You prepare a speech. You got great information, as we did. You put a lot of work into preparing for it, as we did. You've got great delivery techniques, you get the idea. And at the end, you just didn't get the reaction you hoped for? Could it be because you tried planting the seed before you knew the need? Would you like a tool, a very practical tool that will help you not make the mistake I made in developing that program? Yeah, I'm seeing some nods here. You'd like that tool? All right, here it comes. It's a 3-part tool. It consists of 3 questions. Before you start preparing your next presentation, ask yourself these 3 questions about your audience. First, why are these people here to see you, to hear you, to attend to your speech? Why are they coming? You might want to write these down. They'll be on the screen for a few seconds so you can write them down. Second, how can your message improve their situation? How can your message improve their situation? And third, most important, what do you want your listeners to think, do, or feel differently when you are done? What do you want your listeners to think, do, or feel differently when you are done? If you will ask yourself these questions before you ever start an outline or open PowerPoint, your audience is more likely to see you as bringing them something of value. If you don't, well, you might have just bought a ticket on that famous or infamous train to Yuma. You can't plant the seed if you don't what? Meet the need. But which need? You heard me say that audiences don't need speakers. So what do they need? Well, first of all, they need you to be attentive to their needs. And so that's why you now have a tool, a 3-part tool that will help you focus on your audience before you start your preparation. And that's essential, but it's not enough. You have to give every audience what every audience always needs. This next concept you're going to pick up at the next stop on our time machine journey can be a game changer for you. If you will commit to this concept from now on when you speak, you will start to become known as the speaker people want to hear from. You will stand out from the crowd. And I know this to be true because most people won't implement what you're about to pick up. So when you do, this will set you head and shoulders above others. What could that mean for you professionally, in the professional world? Could it widen your expertise, expose more people to your work, give you more confidence making a presentation? All these results can be yours if you'll focus on the one thing that every audience needs. And to see what that is, we need to make another stop on our journey, this time more nearly to the present time. This was not long ago when my phone rang, and I was very excited to see that my daughter Barbara was calling. Now, Barbara lives 1,000 miles away from me, so it's always good to hear her voice, especially when she calls up all excited about something like she was that day. She said, "Dad, guess what? I get to go this weekend to a conference for early childhood educators, and I'm so looking forward to the speaker we're going to have on Saturday afternoon." See, that's how she gets my attention. Call up and talk about my favorite topic, speaking and speakers. She said he's a parent and a musician, and he's written children's books, and he's going to sing and talk to us about social emotional development in early childhood. See, that's her favorite topic. We're kind of nerdy that way. And I said, "Well, sweetie, be sure to call me this weekend and tell me how it went." So sure enough, on Sunday afternoon, the phone rang, and it was Barbara. I said, "Well, how did it go?" "Dad, that speaker yesterday was such a disappointment." Oh, there's something about hearing words like that from 1,000 miles away that just tugs at you. I said, "Well, did he sing for you?" "Oh, he sang." And then after he spent 45 minutes on his personal journey of going from musician to parent to author, he turned out to be nothing more than a cheerleader for early childhood education. He had no expertise in social emotional development. Whew. No expertise. And yet this guy's getting hired. To meeting planner, he probably sounds good on paper, maybe even has some great videos on his website. But to my daughter, who is serious about trying to improve early childhood education, his message was devoid of substance. It was empty. And you know what? When I thought of that, after I had that conversation, it reminded me of a conversation I once had with Darren LaCroix. Now, that name may mean something to you. Darren was the 2001 world champion of public speaking. And over the past decade, he has taught me quite a bit. He once said to me, "David, don't put on your business card that you are a speaker. That's like saying you are a Coke machine." I said, "What? What does that mean?" He said, "Being a speaker is just a delivery mechanism. Just like a Coke machine is a delivery mechanism. People don't want the Coke machine. They want what's inside. They want refreshment. They want the result they get from the Coke machine." Audiences don't care whether you call yourself a speaker. They care that whether you have something of value to offer them. When they don't receive something of value from you, they're likely to be disappointed, just as my daughter was with that speaker. So what do audiences need? Here it comes. Write this down. Audiences need experts they can understand, trust, and relate to. That's what every audience needs. Experts they can understand, trust, and relate to. And you may be thinking at this point, "Well, David, what if I'm not an expert in anything?" Well, of course you are an expert. You don't need an advanced degree or professional credentials to be an expert. You are the world's foremost expert on you, on your own life. The challenge comes in finding stories from your own life that other people can benefit from hearing. What's one of the most important lessons you ever learned? Can you bring that to mind? I hope you have a pen and paper handy. Because I want you to bring to mind a specific instance, a scene in which you learned an important life lesson, whether as a child or as an adult. I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. And then a few more seconds to write something down. I want you to write down anything from a couple of key words to maybe one sentence, no more than that will help you keep that scene front of mind. You'll want this written down because we're going to come back to it later. See, that's the kind of lesson that we can turn into a story for the benefit of our audience. For example, I once learned an important lesson about speaking from watching a woman named Gertrude come into our home. It all started when my wife said to me one Sunday afternoon, she said, "David, next Sunday, I've invited some ladies over for tea. One of them will be Gertrude. And not only is Gertrude going to come into our house, she is going to come through our front door with dignity." And I looked out the window at the 2 flights of steps that separated our front door from the curb. And I thought, this is not going to be easy. You see, Gertrude was an older woman in our church. She took great pride in her dignity and in the fact that she lived alone at age 98. But I knew Gertrude couldn't walk very far and could not handle steps. So you see, every Sunday, her son, John, would pull right up to the front door of her ground floor apartment in his black F-150 pickup, and he would help her into it, drive to the church, and she would wait in the truck while he came up the long sidewalk to our front door and grabbed the wheelchair that lived right inside the front door. He would wheel it out to her, help her into it, wheel her up the long sidewalk and down the center aisle to her favorite pew. That's how she got to church. And that's the only time I ever saw her use a wheelchair. She didn't own one. So here is my challenge. I knew there was no way she was going to make it up those 2 flights of steps to get to our front door. And I knew there was no way we were going to compromise her dignity by carrying her up in a wheelchair. So what do we need? Well, obviously a ramp, right? So ramps are us. Oh, sorry, they're out of business. So Amazon, click wheelchair ramps. They start at $2,000 and they take a long time to configure and ship. And I thought, I've got no budget and very little time. So plan B, you always have a plan B, right? My friend Jim and I raided the scene shop at a local community theater, and we came back with 4-by-8-foot platforms and a pile of lumber, charged up our drill batteries, and got to work. We measured, we cut, we drilled bolt holes, we recharged our batteries, we recharged the drill batteries too. We measured and cut some more. We had no choice but to get this done before Gertrude came on Sunday. You think we had plans? Do you think we had blueprints? Do you think we had surveys? No, we had something better. 2 guys with power tools and a deadline. And by Saturday afternoon, we had built the ramp to end all ramps. It went out from the front door, descended over a set of steps, continued, descended over another set of steps, made a right-angle turn, and came down right at the curb. It was 4 feet wide and 40 feet long, complete with toe boards and railings for safety. And when Gertrude's son pulled up in front of our house on Sunday and helped her out of his truck, she was so excited to see that ramp. She said, "To heck with a wheelchair," and she started up it under her own power before my wife even knew she was there. By the time my wife thought, "Oh, I should wheel a wheelchair out to her," it was too late. She was at the front door. And she walked in with dignity and joined the ladies for tea. And you're thinking, "David, come on, you said this is going to be a story about speaking." It is. There's an important lesson here about speaking. But first, I want you to see if you can answer these questions. So put your fingers on the keyboard and go to the chat function. Let's see who can answer 3 questions. First question, why did Gertrude come into our house? Why did Gertrude come to our house? Don't overthink this, people. She came because she was invited. She came because she was invited. Now, the next question is, why was she able to come into our house? She was able to come into our house because that ramp removed a barrier for her. Third question, why did she stay? Somebody in my last audience said, because you took the ramp away. No, we didn't do that. She stayed because my wife served her tea and scones, not to mention conversation with the other ladies. In other words, she got something she wanted, something of value, of sustenance for her. When you're in Toastmasters, see, here's the speaking lesson. You learn how to make eye contact, use body language, organize your thoughts, speak clearly. That's great. Every one of those skills that you learn is about removing barriers to communication. Congratulations, those barriers need to be removed. But removing barriers is not enough. You have to invite people in. And once they're with you, you have to give them a reason to stay. You have to invite people in, remove barriers, and give them a reason to stay. All three. The singing speaker that my daughter encountered had stories to invite people in. He had music to remove barriers, but 2 out of 3 is not enough. What my daughter experienced was no tea and scones, just water and crusts, because she did not receive the nourishment she was looking for. Invite people in, remove obstacles, barriers, give them a reason to stay. All three. Now, what's the best way to invite people in? The best way to invite people in is with stories. Why? Why stories? Here's the science behind stories. When you hear a well-told story, your brain secretes this chemical called oxytocin. It's the same chemical your brain secretes when you caress your lover. There, I just got your attention, right? Or if you don't want to go there, when you pet your dog. That's my dog Frida saying, don't take my chew toy away. But back to the oxytocin. Oxytocin is a neurotransmitter that causes people to experience a feeling of empathy for someone else. They will want what you have to offer, but that's where you have to offer them something of value. First, you get them to experience a sense of empathy for you. You see, when you speak, well, specifically, when you tell a story where somebody's striving for something that initially they can't get and they overcome an obstacle, that kind of story with a little tension to it, you're changing your audience's brain chemistry. Yeah, and it's legal, no matter where you live. You will cause them to want what you have to offer, but you have to offer them something of substance. You see, when my daughter heard that speaker that offered her nothing of substance, it was as if she walked up to that Coke machine Darren was talking about, pushed the button, and out popped a shiny but nearly empty can. Not what she was hoping for. Don't be the empty can. Or as Darren would say, don't be the Coke machine. Here's what you need to do. Your audience needs you to be the explainer, not just the container. The skills you build in Toastmasters are great, but there's got to be some substance behind what you're doing. Be the explainer, not just the container. People want content. People want solid content, especially if you're speaking outside Toastmasters. But here's the thing. Before they'll accept that content from you, they must see you as what? The expert they can understand, trust, and relate to. So the order of importance is you've got to put connection before content. Connection before content. You might want to write that down too. So thanks to oxytocin, we know that stories connect with people. Just be sure each story illustrates a point. When people remember your stories, they'll remember your points. When you remember that image you have in your mind of Gertrude working her way up that ramp, you will remember invite people in, remove barriers, give them a reason to stay. Don't forget about the tea and scones. Now, do you want to know more about telling stories that'll get the oxytocin flowing? How would you like a resource that will help you not only with telling better stories, but if you give technical presentations, the resource will help you with those as well. And if you'd like more confidence when you present, this will even help you with that. What you're seeing here on the screen are 3 books I've written, and there's a link to them in the chat. The Speaker's Quick Guide to Telling Better Stories, The Speaker's Quick Guide to Technical Presentations, and The Speaker's Quick Guide to Presenting with Confidence. And right now, and through this weekend, so you might want to act on this quickly. I hope you're not seeing this too far off in the future. They happen to be at the moment 30% off in paperback on Amazon. So make sure you pick up all 3 of them. They're a quick read. None of them takes you more than an hour or 2 to get through, and there's no fluff. There's just great and helpful information and some good examples. So there's a resource that can help you go deeper than we have time to go through today into your stories and how you use them. Together, those books will help you to be the explainer, not just the container, the expert your audience needs. So now the secret is out. Speakers have to focus on their audience's needs more than their own. You can't plant the seed if you don't meet the need. And you've got a tool for focusing on audience's needs. You understand that every audience needs experts they can understand, trust, and relate to. But have we covered all those bases? When you're telling your stories, people will understand your points, and those stories will also make you relatable. What about building trust? Imagine how it feels to come onto stage or come to the front of the room knowing that you and your audience trust each other. Doesn't that feel better than just wandering out there? Well, there's a third tool you can pick up. One more tool that'll help you build that trust. And for you to pick up that tool, we have to make one more stop in our little magic time machine. Okay? 1993, Chapel Hill, North Carolina. The first time I felt emotionally naked in front of an audience. Come on, you didn't think I meant literally naked, did you? It's not that kind of story. The occasion was my sister's wedding. Don't you just love a good wedding? My sister had picked out this beautiful setting at a country estate just outside Chapel Hill. I was there with my family. Our mother was there. Our other sisters were there. But one person was missing. Exactly 6 months before, the day after Christmas, my father had died unexpectedly. Dad was a minister. And everyone in the family was thinking the same thing. He should have been there to officiate. This was our first family gathering since his funeral. And emotions were just bubbling to the surface all over the place. How could we be so excited for Carol's wedding and at the same time know that we're still grieving and sad and angry about losing my father? Conflicting feelings. Have you ever had those conflicting feelings before? You got all knotted up inside. And those conflicts were bubbling to the surface in different ways. Fortunately, most of us weren't showing it the way my 4-year-old was. When we went to pick her up to leave to make the trip for the wedding, we picked her up from preschool. And her preschool teacher pulled my wife and me aside and said, during nap time, your daughter has been kicking her classmates. Well, kicking happens in 4-year-old classrooms, right? In the head. Oh, she didn't understand what she was feeling, and how could she be expected to? And frankly, the adults among us, well, we just couldn't find somebody to kick. So there we were in the midst of all these conflicting emotions. The wedding's about to start. I'm just praying, God, get me through this. And my mother turns to me at the last moment and says, you know, David, since your father's not here, you're going to have to offer a toast at the reception. Did I mention this was years before I'd ever joined Toastmasters? I mean, even if you're an experienced Toastmaster, how would you like to give a wedding speech with a half hour's notice? And on top of that, there were over 100 people there whom I mostly did not know outside of my immediate family. And my sister's best friend, Kim, the maid of honor. And don't forget, this is supposed to be their only wedding. I got to get this right. And then to top that off, the first toast at the reception from the best man. Oh my gosh. It was the most shudder-provoking, cringe-inducing, all-around awful wedding toast you could possibly imagine. You think I'm exaggerating. If you were called upon to give a wedding toast, would you start by rehashing the groom's divorce from his first wife? That's how bad it was. And with that as the backdrop, I had to get up and speak next. My father had once told me what to do in this situation. He said, if you know the first thing you're going to say and the last thing you're going to say, then whatever happens in between, you will sound prepared. So that's what I attempted to do. I said to the assembled group, I want you to think about your family. There's only 3 ways a person comes into a family: birth, adoption, and marriage. And today we are here to celebrate Aldo coming into our family. And I went on from there. I don't know what I said because nobody recorded it, but I do know that at some point I worked in a reference to my late father and the poignancy of his not being there to help us welcome Aldo. And I managed to make it poignant and yet uplifting at the same time, somehow. And at the end, of course, I closed it with, here's to Carol and Aldo. That part I knew was coming. And afterward, the maid of honor said to me, David, you know you nailed it when the waiters are crying. Thanks, Dad. Maybe. I didn't set out to nail it. I set out to thank those assembled people, those wedding guests, and apparently the waiters, for giving us the space to feel all the feels. I felt nervous and unprepared. I felt, in fact, emotionally naked. And yet somehow, in my nakedness, I gave those people permission to feel all the feels with us. What made that possible? It was something I would much later come to recognize for its value to speakers: vulnerability. When you put yourself out there, warts and all, and let other people see in you whatever they're going to see in you, that's being vulnerable. When Jerry Siegel created the character of Superman for Action Comics, he wrote himself eventually into a corner because he kept making Superman more and more invulnerable. Pretty soon he was bulletproof, flameproof, everything proof, right? Well, if he couldn't be harmed, then he couldn't be placed in peril. So how could we keep making up interesting stories about it? So what did the writers do to make Superman possibly vulnerable again? Who knows? You can type it into the chat, or maybe you can unmute and tell me. I don't know. I guess not if you're not a panelist. What made Superman vulnerable? Let's see who's got the answer.
Kryptonite.
Kryptonite. That's right, Colleen. It took the writers of the radio show actually to invent kryptonite, the one substance in the universe that can weaken Superman and sap him of his powers. You see, it turns out that a character who is truly invulnerable just can't hold our attention for very long. And guess what? The same thing is true of speakers. People don't want bulletproof speakers any more than they want bullet points. When you speak, vulnerability is your superpower. Now, this was a hard lesson for me to learn, and I'm still learning it. Among the feedback that I get most often when I'm speaking is, David, you're a little reserved. You're polished, but you're kind of, in control. And I know that I'm not always that vulnerable because it's not always comfortable being vulnerable. But I know that when I embrace that discomfort, people will embrace me and my message. And they'll do the same thing for you too. You've got to let people see what is your kryptonite. And here's a very practical way you can do that. When you're speaking, take some time to let people see your frustrations, your failures, your firsts, and your flaws. Your frustrations, your failures, your firsts, and your flaws. Do you see me as an expert you can understand, trust, and relate to? I hope so. If you do, it may be because I started out by sharing with you my frustration at failing the first time I tried to create that training project. That's 3 out of 4, and I haven't even shown you my flaws yet. So share your frustrations, your failures, your firsts, and your flaws. Let people see how you became the expert that you are. A few minutes ago, you jotted down a few words or maybe a sentence to remind you of a time when you learned a lesson in your life. When you think back to that lesson, was there an obstacle you had to overcome to learn that lesson? Who helped you learn it? I challenge you to share that story in your next speech. Someone helped you. You weren't always the hero that you are now. So you can't plant the seed if you don't meet the need. Audiences want you to be the explainer, not just the container, and vulnerability is your superpower. There's our 3 stops on our journey. Here's a bonus 4th stop for you. Put yourself in the front seat of my Honda Civic with me in 1990 as I'm driving across Texas from Austin to Houston, and you would experience the palpable excitement in the air. I was on my way to Houston to deliver a paper, a talk, a technical talk for my very first time at the National Broadcast Engineering Conference, and I was pumped. Yeah, even though my audience was going to be engineers, and they're a tough audience, I was pumped. I drove to Houston. I pulled up in front of the George R. Brown Convention Center at the edge of downtown. I walked into this cavernous ballroom filled with mostly empty chairs. I had an audience of about 20 people. There was a stage, a lectern, and the brightest object in the room, the projection screen. Did I mention this was 2 p.m, after lunchtime? You see where I'm going with this? My pet presentation turned into a hands-on workshop on getting an afternoon nap. Yeah, I was so boring, I should have brought them pillows. And when I was done, and I was back in my Civic driving back to Austin, all I could think of was, how am I going to tell my boss this turned out to be such a waste of time? That was 1990. Now, fast forward to 2005. I've been invited to Washington, D.C. to moderate a day-long broadcast industry summit meeting on how we're going to roll out that new technology. Who is in attendance at this meeting? Senior VPs from all the TV networks, CEOs of the companies that are going to be providing the new technology, and me, up at the lectern for much of the day and in the crosshairs, because this was a contentious meeting, not an easy meeting to moderate. But nobody went to sleep. And one seed that I planted at that meeting definitely took root, because shortly afterward, the CEO of the company that was going to do the training called me up, flew me to San Jose, and said, David, based on the communication skills we saw you demonstrate at that meeting, we want you to head up this training project. And after that false start in Yuma that I told you about earlier, we would go on to train more than 10,000 people, and that program was considered a complete success. And since that time, I've not stood still. I've continued to grow, not just as an engineer, but as a speaker and presenter. I have spoken in front of thousands of people in dozens of cities. I've written the 3 books that I told you about, co-authored a 4th one that reached #1 on Amazon in 3 categories, and I have a podcast specifically on communication skills for scientists and engineers. Now, what do you think made all that possible? What do you think made the difference between where I was when I was putting an audience to sleep in Houston and where I am today? What made the difference?
Practice and polishing your tools.
Practice and polishing my tools. That was certainly a part of it. Here's the thing about practicing. If you're practicing the wrong things, you're just going to get worse faster. Here's what made the difference. After that debacle in Houston, I knew I could not rely for my professional development solely on my technical skills and my charming good looks. I mean, that would be a bad plan, right? I knew I needed something more. Have you ever heard the expression, what got you here won't get you there? Well, ever since Houston, I've been looking for what will get me there, to the next stage, the next chapter in my life. I invested thousands of dollars in coaching and training from some of the best speakers in the business. I read book after book. I spent year after frustrating year looking for what every speaker wants, just a process I can follow. Just give me a process I can follow that works every time. And I'm happy to say that I have found that process and bottled it up for you. It's all in a course titled Make Your Data Make a Difference. 6 weeks to confidently engaging any audience at any time. And in it, you'll find the keys that helped me go from where I was then right to where I am now. Now, this is a 6-week live course beginning on February 28th. And I can only take a certain number of people in the class because of the coaching involved. So let me ask you this. Do you think these principles work? Raise your hand if you think I've connected with you today. I mean, I can only see a couple of people with their hands up, right? So yeah, the principles definitely work because everything you've seen me do today reflects skills I've learned from other people. Now, all the particulars about the course can be found at that link that was just shared with you there in the chat, including the fact that, well, here's a little secret for you. The course is $697, but for right now, what I'm doing is I'm bundling it with a second course called Own the Virtual Stage, Confidently Connect with an Unseen Audience, which will help you elevate your presence when you're doing something like this virtually. Now, together, that would be $894, but for my Toastmasters friends, it's not $894, it's not $697. I'm taking $200 off, and it's only $497 for a 6-week, 12-session live online course. But here's the thing. I can only take 10 people because of the live coaching involved. So if you want this course, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give somebody a chance to get it for free right now by answering a question. So go to the chat, get your fingers on the keyboards. Colleen is going to help me watch the chat and pick the first complete response that comes in to this question. Are you ready for the question? In the story about Gertrude coming to our house, her son John pulled up in what kind of vehicle?
We have one answer.
We have one answer. It's a pickup truck. All right, we're going to let David Sager be the winner today. So David, stay with me when we get done, and I'll give you the information on how we can get you signed up for the course. The complete answer would be a black F-150, which helps me illustrate an interesting point about speaking. Specificity leads to memorability. Specificity makes for memorability. When you put specifics in your stories, people will remember them because they can visualize them. So it was, in fact, a black F-150 pickup truck. I have found that a color and a number are a really easy way to add specificity to a story. Would you like to know how that works? So would I. I have no idea, but it works. Trust me. So that's a little tip for you. Now, before I give my closing remarks, it looks like we can take about 5 minutes for questions. I do have closing remarks to come after the questions, so I'll be watching the time. Colleen, have we had any questions come in through the question box? Who has the first short, specific question about anything I've talked about so far?
One person asked the name of the title of the 3 books you were speaking of. It flashed too quickly for them. Okay. If you'll go in the chat to the link under where Colleen has typed books, there's an Amazon link there, and that will take you to the page for all 3 of the titles. The titles, in fact, are The Speaker's Quick Guide to Telling Better Stories, The Speaker's Quick Guide to Technical Presentations, and The Speaker's Quick Guide to Presenting with Confidence. That Amazon short link will take you to a page with all 3 of them. I hope that answered the question. Is there another question, Colleen? The cost, and I pulled up the Amazon. They're $6.97 per paperback, or on Kindle. If you have a Kindle, they're $2.99 to buy.
That's right. Thank you for sharing that information. Are there other questions? You know, a question I often get about this time is, David, if I've got a lot of information to present but no story, is that okay? How can I work in a story in an information or data-heavy presentation? And the answer is, if you'll make note of this, when you get the book, The Speaker's Quick Guide to to Telling Better Stories, I want you to go to page 17. Because on page 17 in the book, there's a series of 8 questions that will help you uncover the story behind your information. Questions like, what did this information mean to you when you first learned it? Or what need drove you to discover this information? There's always a story, because you didn't always know what you know now, and there was a reason why something stood in the way of your knowing that initially.
And we have a question from my phone person, and they said, how did you read this? Yeah, I can tell the story, but what do I have to offer? What is my value? How do I know my value?
I can tell the story, but how do I know my value? What an insightful and interesting question. What is it that you've learned? Did you do the exercise I gave you before where I asked you to write down a lesson that you've learned? It may very well be that you know people who haven't yet learned that lesson. So that and the story of how you learned the lesson and overcame an obstacle with the help of someone else to learn it, that can be your story. You don't have to have climbed Mount Everest to have a story. You don't have to have saved somebody from a raging river to have a story. Anytime desire meets obstacle, there's a story. I would encourage you to learn more about that in the book, The Speaker's Quick Guide to Telling Better Stories, because it explains how you can structure a story, gives you 3 different models to help you create a story, and tells you what a story will do for you as a speaker. So I hope I answered that caller's question. Let me close with this. Imagine that you are driving up a steep, narrow, rocky road. Oh, I had another question come in. Can I repeat the 3 questions that you should answer before preparing the speech? I tell you what, I'll put those on the screen. There we go.
Take a picture.
I'll put them on the screen. Yeah, do a screenshot. Now imagine that you are driving up a steep, narrow, rocky road, driving up the forested flank of a mountain in central Colorado on a perfectly cloudless June day. That's what I was doing in my F-350 4-wheel drive pickup truck, happened to be white, with my client Dan seated next to me. Picture a young Alex Trebek dressed like a lumberjack. That's Dan. I had one job that day, and that was to get Dan and me to the top of Mount Baldy to inspect a communications site. The windows were down and the scent of evergreens was blowing in our faces. And the higher we went, the more I thought, man, I love this job. This was the job that had brought me to Colorado from Texas just the year before. We're bouncing up this road and I'm showing off my newfound mountain driving skills. And all of a sudden, what? Oh, heck no. We came around a corner, still in the woods, and a snowbank taller than the truck completely blocked the road. We were below timberline, so there was no way to drive around it. It was as if Mother Nature was saying to me, that's what I think of your 4-wheel drive. And as I started, I thought, well, it was a wasted trip. I'll have to do this another time. And as I started looking for a place to turn around, Dan looked at me as if to say, what's the matter with you, Flatlander? No, he was nicer than that. What he actually said was, it's a beautiful day. Why don't we walk? Did I mention that Dan lived in those mountains? The man's got red blood cells he hasn't even used yet. We're at 11,000 feet. You know how thin the air is at 11,000 feet when you've grown up near sea level? And we had to get to 12,000 to get our work done. Well, what can I do? What would you do? I got out of the truck, I shouldered my pack, and I started walking. And before long, Dan, the mountain man, took pity on me. He said, you want me to carry that pack for you? And I said, sure. I was just gasping for breath in no time at all. It was take 2 steps, pause for breath. And then pretty soon it was take 1 step, pause for breath. I couldn't even look up to see where we were going. I just kept my eyes on my feet and trudged up this mountain. And the whole time I was thinking to myself, and the higher we got, the more I thought, man, what am I doing here? And I remember saying to myself, David, you screwed up. You screwed up big time because your boss said to you, you know, that road won't be open until July. But no, did you listen to him? You had to take control. You had to be in charge. And now here you are embarrassing yourself and wasting your client's time. You screwed up. Be honest. Have you ever talked to yourself that way? See, I was trudging up that mountain under an added burden. Instead of carrying my pack, I was carrying this invisible critic. And all I could hear it say was, David, you screwed up because you're walking instead of driving. Until Dan said something I'll never forget. He stopped and he looked around and he said, can you believe somebody is paying us to do this? I stopped, took a deep breath, and I looked up, and oh my gosh, rising above the ridge that we were climbing were some of the 14,000-foot peaks of the Continental Divide. Spread out below us was the town of Breckenridge with its 4 ski mountains across the valley from us. And just coming into view beyond that was the Mount of the Holy Cross with its namesake formation that you can only see at the perfect time of year when just enough of the snow has melted away to reveal this 1,000-foot high white cross. Well, it's no wonder I was out of breath. I was surrounded by views that can only be described as what? Breathtaking. And there I was telling myself, David, you're so stupid because you're walking up this mountain instead of driving. Can you believe somebody is paying us to do this? Now, at that moment, did my lungs fill with air? Did the angels sing as we went prancing up the mountain? Absolutely not. We still had 500 feet to go. It was still a challenge, but it was a challenge I could rise to because now I was no longer carrying that invisible critic. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't a screw up. I wasn't wasting my time and embarrassing myself. And I may not have been a mountain man like Dan, but I was no flatlander anymore. Now, what has your invisible critic been saying to you? Oh, so you're in Toastmasters and you think people want to hear you speak. Yeah, right. Are you going to advance in that contest? Who do you think you are, Darren LaCroix? What would it take for you to ditch that invisible critic and climb your mountain without it? All it took for me was one question and the resulting change in perspective. Because what Dan said made me realize what a privilege it was to be doing this work in this gorgeous place on this beautiful June day. So here's my question. How do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as someone worthy of investing in? Or are you someone like I was at one point who's just going to keep your eyes on your feet and focus on the status quo? I wish you could have seen the views I saw that day from Mount Baldy. But what Dan helped me see is that sometimes the view you need is a new view of you. Colleen, back to you.
Thank you so much, David. We had one more question on the course, and it was the course time and location. Is it on Zoom?
It will be on Zoom. Yes, it will be on Zoom. All of the details are in that link that is in the chat. It will be on Zoom. It will be conducted live. There will be interaction with me, the instructor. There will be content sessions on Mondays and Q&A and coaching sessions on Fridays, every week for 6 weeks, beginning on February 28th, starting each day at 1 p.m. Eastern time. That's 11 o'clock to those of us in the Mountain Time Zone. And my email address is now right there on the screen. I'll just go to, there we go. Blank the rest of that out. It's david@davidotey.com. So if you have any other questions, please reach out to me, david@davidotey.com, and I'd love to hear from you.
Well, thank you, Mr. David Otey. That was awesome. Anyone else have any questions or anything quick? Oh, we are out of time. Reach out to David. This was amazing. Thanks so much. And I'll get the YouTube video out.